the walls of the engine if you're running LNG and then you switch to gasoline, what residue is on the walls of the engine? How does that affect future combustions? I mean, it just seems like it's not possible.
Well, again, you ask very insightful questions. So the first thing is that if we go with the tubular combustors that I described before, there are no residues. There is nothing left unburned. There's no, like if you look at the tailpipe of a regular car engine, it's black. Why is that? Well, it's because the fuel is not completely burned and the soot comes out of the tailpipe and accumulates. And even you can see that in some diesel engines that the exhaust is black because of the soot. You will not have any of that with the engine I'm talking about. So that's not an issue. Now, how would you switch from one fuel to another? And you rightly say that they have different energy contents. That would seem disruptive. Well, all you would have to do is just have a thermometer coming off your combustor. So as you switch to a fuel, let's imagine that you're first burning gasoline, which is pretty high energy content, and the temperature coming off the combustor is where you want it. And then you switch to ethanol. Ethanol has about 66% of the energy content of gasoline. And what you would notice is that, the temperature dropped because, the ethanol doesn't have the same energy content. Well, then you just have a feedback mechanism and you say, okay, well, I'll just pump more ethanol in order to get the temperature up where it needs to be. Now, in a Brayton cycle engine like I'm talking about, you have a tremendous excess of air. In the case of a traditional automobile engine, what's called stoichiometric, the fuel and the air is almost exactly balanced so that there's almost no oxygen left in the exhaust. Not so with the Brayton cycle engine. It has 2 or 3 times more oxygen than is needed for the combustion. So no matter what fuel you put in there, there's always enough oxygen to complete the combustion process. So the answer to your question is you have a feedback loop. You just measure the temperature coming off the combustor and then regulate the speed of the pump that puts fuel into the combustor. And you can seamlessly go from one fuel to another.
Well, when you do, I mean, what's the lag time where the new fuel would kick in? And even if the residue is tiny, any amount of residue would be cycled out of the engine.
Yeah, I want you to get rid of this idea of residue. There isn't any. Nothing survives this tubular combustor in terms of the raw fuel. Nothing, the fuel, the carbon, tar, nothing of that type can make it through this combustor. That's what makes it so wonderful. There isn't any residue. Really, the only issue with switching fuels is to maintain the temperature. Now, the thermocouple can have a very, very rapid response, as can a pump. So within a few milliseconds or so, you can sense, there's a new fuel. Let me change the parameters. And there's so much inertia, thermal inertia and mechanical inertia, you wouldn't detect it in the engine. It would be seamless. You wouldn't notice it.
What if you have the fuels change depending on the torque and the speed and the load? You're going uphill starting from the stop. Could you have one fuel for that part of it? And then when it senses that, let's say you're doing highway driving or some other easier kind of driving or going downhill, the fuel switches to accommodate a lower torque, higher speed situation, let's say.
As always, you have really insightful questions. So it would be, I think, impractical to have multiple fuels on a vehicle, and everything can be accomplished with one fuel. So we don't need to change the fuel. But what you do need to do is change the torque output, the engine, to match what's going on. And that can be done directly in the engine by changing the pressure ratio or the compression ratio. So those techniques we have in our engine to, on the fly, change the pressure ratio of the engine. So when you're cruising down the highway, the pressure ratio might be 2-to-1. And when you want to climb up a hill, it might be 6-to-1. So that's one solution. Another solution, as I mentioned before, is that you could hybridize the vehicle so that these surges in power that are required would actually come from the electric system, which is pretty easy to regulate the flow of electricity. That's why people like all electric vehicles, is because they're fun to drive. You can get these surges of power as the going from 0 to 60 in 2 or 3 seconds is a blast, right? So that's, I think, one of the reasons people love all electric cars is they're really fun to drive.